It's December. It's a new month, and with a new month comes a whole new set of topics and focus, not only for us on Sunday mornings, but also, as you heard in the announcements, on Wednesday evenings. And I want to highlight what's happening on Wednesday evenings for our radio listening audience and our video watching audience to enjoy that information too, because everyone is invited to participate on Wednesdays when we are observing the different ways of celebrating the light in a spiritual context, starting, as you heard, with December 5th with Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights that has actually begun, and I already heard from the organizers it's going to be a lot of fun, and takes place in the North Wing, and everyone is welcome. Reverend Tara and her interfaith connections and friends are bringing this to us. I'm really delighted. Now, Wednesday, December 12th will be followed up with Las Posadas, which starts on December 16th and goes through to the 24th. And it's celebrated chiefly in Latin America for many years, in Mexico and Guatemala and Cuba, and now in Santa Rosa. It's a period of 9 days of spiritual practice. Now, the word pasada means in. So it has to do with the reenactment of the journey of Mary and Joseph to the place where the nativity took place. So that is very exciting that we're doing that as well. Followed the next week, December 19th, Kwanzaa. That's another week-long celebration that honors African American heritage, and it starts on December 26th and culminates on I believe the first day of the year. Well, it ends with gift giving and feasts. That's the part you need to know about. And it's based on principles such as cooperation, purpose, creativity, faith, and it's a wonderful tradition for us to tune into. Then Wednesday, December 26th, we'll be celebrating the winter solstice and the spiritual significance. Now, winter solstice occurs near to December 21, and it's the moment on our planet here in the Northern Hemisphere when the world is at its darkest. And it signifies the beginning of the return of the light. And so you can see there's potential for tremendous spiritual significance in that. A natural moment on our planet that can help us connect to our spiritual identity. Everyone is welcome. That's Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Then on Sundays, right here, we're starting a month of talking about fulfillment and happiness. And last week, I told you we would start with talking about the role that forgiveness plays in fulfillment and happiness. So this is a fun topic, and not even a giggle. It's a difficult topic. And so there are 3 things I want to talk about, and they are, first of all, forgiving ourselves, then forgiving each other, and finally, and possibly the most important, is having compassion with the process, especially during that time when it's very difficult to do and to follow through, when we are having difficulty with making progress with forgiveness, or maybe even can't forgive at all. To have compassion and not be forceful about the process. Now, number one, forgiving ourselves, in my opinion, is more challenging than forgiving other people. And I think that's because some of us are our own worst critics inside. So I've had to work on self-forgiveness with a lot of tenderness, and I've got 3 ideas to share with you about how I've made progress in self-forgiveness, and they are these. First of all, get help. Why? Because it can be very difficult to untangle self-resentments all by yourself. So if you've noticed you've got a good deal or just a little bit of self-unforgiveness, you might want to consider investing in professional assistance, guidance, because it can be very difficult to navigate all by yourself. I mean, I don't try to fix my dental issues by myself, you know. You know, there in the kitchen, if I've got a sore tooth, I don't get out a drill and fix it. I don't even try to cut my own hair. You know. Well, actually, once I did. You know, I was going to go on a long bike ride and it was very hot, and I thought, how hard can this be? Right? Just buzz. And so I did it. In the bathroom, and I ended up having these patches of hair on the back of my head because I couldn't see what was going on there. You know, it looked good from the front, but everybody else could see what I'd been up to. Do you know what I'm talking about? And that's like doing your own self-forgiveness work. Quite likely, there are things that you just can't see. You just can't see. You know how everybody else can, but you can't because you're in it. And that's where a professional can be very helpful, helping us to identify and replace sometimes the feelings, the thoughts, the ideas, the blocks that are stopping us from moving forward and releasing self-forgiveness so that we can prosper and we can flourish and we can be fulfilled and happy again. So when I say professional assistance, I'm talking, for example, like we have licensed prayer practitioners that are trained at the center right here. If you go to our website, www.cslsr.org, under the About menu tab, there's a directory of practitioners. It's very nice because you can see their picture, you can see their bio and their fee structure because you hire them on a fee-for-service basis. It's very wonderful. Or you could work with a therapist. I have benefited very much from working with both of these types of professional in working through my own self-forgiveness issues. So I call this first step getting help. I also call it confession, because of the tremendous healing power of having an honest, while gentle, look at myself and this issue, whatever it is. You know, a big part of self-forgiveness is seeing and accepting. Yes, I did that, and I shouldn't have. Or, yes, I didn't do that, and I should have. You know. Oh, to own it and admit to it is a very powerful beginning place, which benefits from help from the outside. And then I can follow up by helping myself. You see, my responsibility doesn't end there. I can help myself with spiritual practices that will help me soften my emotional and mental grip on the past. That's the next step. Help yourself. You know, first, I guess you've got to decide, is self-forgiveness an issue for me? Because it could be hidden. You know, sometimes it shows up in little telltale signs. Like, for example, people who have got self-forgiveness issues sometimes find it, their ability to like themselves gets weaker and weaker. Sometimes what happens is a person with self-unforgiveness issues is punishing themselves by not taking care of themselves or working double extra hard to compensate. Sometimes what happens is people will develop self-destructive behaviors as self-punishment. Sometimes what will happen is people will get stuck in a thinking loop that they can't see themselves, but everybody else can see. And it's characterized by the frequent retelling in their own mind, or sometimes verbally, of the past mistake. Sometimes what happens is people will start to dismiss compliments or opportunities or praise because in the back of their head they've got, if they only knew. And sometimes what happens is unforgiveness towards self shows up as being resistant or avoiding doing the very things that will shore up our energy and health and well-being. That's why that first step is so important, to get some help. Don't skip that and go straight to the help yourself part. But you can do this help yourself part for almost anything in the world that you're looking to bring some light into. It's a beautiful practice. It helped me tremendously when I was working on self-forgiveness. I got the help, and then I developed this practice. When the thought of the past transgression comes up, I had to learn to say to myself, I acknowledge that, and I accept my part in it. And then I had to take a moment to notice and feel what feelings I was experiencing in that moment. Very important. And then I had to be ready to follow up with something quite specific. So it takes mindful preparation to do this practice. You want to be prepared for when the thought comes up. You want to know what you're going to do. And like, for example, you might have a mantra or a prayer that you can repeat right away, or maybe something a little more extensive that you carry around on a card that you can take out and read in that moment when you're remembering the transgression. But you want to be very mindful and specific about it, religious about it, faithful. Like, for example, you could, like the Canticle of the Creatures, you can get a free copy of that outside in the social hall, the one that St. Francis wrote. That's a beautiful song of praise and thanksgiving. Or, another great example is in this week's assigned reading in Living the Science of Mind. At the end of that week's chapter is a beautiful prayer for this kind of use. Now, it's quite long, but you could take little portions out of it that suit you. But imagine in that moment, the memory of the transgression comes up that you are working with, your own transgression. You recognize it. You acknowledge your part in it mentally. You notice the feeling in your body where it is. And then you take a moment and you read something like this to yourself. God is all there is. God is love. Love is the motivating power of the whole universe. God is in everything. God is in everyone. Realizing that love is the great motivating power of life, and knowing that God must be at the center of everything, today I am meeting this presence in everyone and seeing its manifestation in everything. If there is any condemnation or animosity in me, I gladly release it. I release it and I let it go, as I turn to that silent presence within me, which gives all and withholds nothing. I enter into the harmony of eternal peace, into the joy of knowing that I am right now in the kingdom of God, from which no person is ever excluded. My yesterdays are gone, and my tomorrows stretch forth before me in an endless future. And from out of the invisible, there comes to me these words: today thou art with me in paradise. Now, if you can fit that practice into your day, if you can carry this around with you, look, it helped me. It does something. You see, and it's not just step number 2. I'm talking about a bigger picture of all the things that you can do, which includes the next step, which is delightful, is turning your attention from self to others by blessing them and releasing them in your thinking. Now, Why blessing other people? Well, when you bless other people, it helps them. And when you help other people, it helps you. It's a beautiful, mutually nourishing practice. So you can turn this into another ritual for personal use that you use to start every day or to end every day, especially effective when you're working on self-forgiveness. And you got to create something that's not too complicated, because otherwise you won't do it. You know how we are. It's got to be simple. So, for example, you might light a candle at the beginning of the day, because there's something holy about that. And then you take a moment and breathe in and close your eyes, and then think about people you love. And then after a moment, move to thinking about people who love you. And then after a moment, think about things you love to do. Whatever you think about, in this sacred moment that doesn't take even more than a couple of minutes, you're just not allowed to dwell on the past. So there are some suggestions for what has worked for me as I navigated the complex and difficult path of self-forgiveness. God help, so I could confess. I followed up with helping myself by acknowledging, releasing, and praying, and I turned my attention regularly in a ceremonial way to a practice of blessing other people. Now, the next part of this is forgiving each other. Well, that's fun too. All sorts of fun. It's very difficult. So let's begin by looking at what gets in the way of forgiving each other. I think for me, one of the biggest blocks was the confusion of what forgiveness is and what it isn't. And someone once suggested to me that I make a list of what forgiveness isn't, so I could get clear for myself. And this person suggested I do my research. So I did. I looked at practitioners, ministers, websites, therapists, and I started to collect a list of what I think forgiveness is not. Now, here's my list, and hopefully it will stimulate you making your own list for clarity. And the list is this. Forgiveness is not excusing unkindness or wrongdoing, or suggesting that what was done was okay. Forgiveness is not forgetting that something painful happened. Forgiveness is not overlooking poor behavior, and neither is it dropping future accountability. Forgiveness doesn't have to be like a supernatural experience. You know, sometimes how we imagine it's going to be trumpets and angels coming down, or otherworldly. It's actually quite messy and emotional and painful. On the other side of it, though, is where the peace comes. Forgiveness is not denying or minimizing your hurt feelings or sweeping them under the rug. Forgiveness is not reunion with the offender, neither is it giving them permission to do it again. And forgiveness is not necessarily easy. It's emotional. It's messy. So when you make your list of what forgiveness is not, you probably want to do what I did and start to build your list of what you think forgiveness is. So you've got the other side of it. It's very helpful. So my list is still in progress. I think what forgiveness is freedom. I think what forgiveness is relieving myself from the burden of the past. I think it's also embracing the prospect of being a whole person again. The possibility of that. And it's also giving the person or the institution or the group or the family that you're working with the possibility, the freedom of also being whole again. Another item I ought to add to my list of what forgiveness is not? It's not revenge. Yeah. That's a big deal. And it's not even the hope of getting remorse from the other person. That can get you into trouble. That can be a big block. Because sometimes it's just not physically possible. Sometimes they don't care. Sometimes they're dead. Sometimes it's an abstract thing like life itself. So, if you're fixed on revenge or remorse, that can lead to tremendous frustration. And the only thing I can offer in cases like this, because forgiveness is so deeply personal, I can just give you advice from my own experience. And my advice is forget revenge. Forget even getting payback. Because that's something for which the price is always higher than we thought. It's always it's always too expensive. If you've been here in these past months and we've been talking about the reciprocal nature of the universe and the law of cause and effect and how this world works, you don't want to play with revenge. That's going to hurt you. Besides, there's something better. There is something better than revenge. And it's the last item on this list. It's healing, wholeness, living again. That is sweet. Yeah, talking about what happened and being heard can be very healing. It's not always available, but I acknowledge it can be healing. But talking about it and getting hurt is not the same as rehashing old hurts over and over and over again and never letting someone forget about the hurt they did. It's different. At some point we have to move on. The Apostle Paul talks about that difficulty of moving on in a very tender and beautiful way in Philippians. He says, brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. In other words, he says, I know I'm not there yet. Isn't that beautiful? I know I'm not there yet, but I know what I should do. He says, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining forward to what is ahead, I press toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Well, it can be very difficult to press forward when you don't feel heard, when you haven't had the opportunity to tell the story of your betrayal. It got me to thinking about South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that took place there many years ago. You may be aware of that. It was a kind of experiment in healing and forgiveness because during the apartheid era, torture, violence, crimes against humanity were going on across the nation in South Africa. And so the commission was put together to give people an opportunity to tell their story. And one of the ideas behind the commission was that being able to testify in an open setting like that might contribute to lessening the pain and open the pathway to healing. Now look, it didn't wipe out the past. That's not what reconciliation means. To reconcile things is to bring two things together, often two things that are unacceptable and undesirable, and to say, yep, that happened. It doesn't make it okay. It brings it out into the open for the light of healing to have its way. To create an opening, the commission was intended to create an opening for forgiveness to be a possibility among those who were speaking, sometimes with their perpetrators in the room, And also on behalf of those people who did not speak, whose stories may have been still too painful to even tell themselves, but they received healing through the witnessing of other stories being told. It's very tender. And that thought of, I'm not ready to even tell my story, it brings us to the very important next step, to have compassion for the process itself. Because as one of the people in the commission organizers said, even if you do testify, it may result in higher anxiety at first, a re-traumatization, and yet in time, the hope was that it would ease the pain. Very much like when a bee stings you and then you pull it out. That's the second trauma. The pain doesn't go away then. It's going to later. That's exactly what it's like. And this pain is exactly what makes forgiveness such difficult work to do. Sometimes it could seem to be easier just to ignore it. Ignore what happened. And turn your back on what happened. And turn your back on what happened and then call that moving on. However, it is rarely the case that ignoring leads to fulfillment and happiness. What happens instead is that below the surface, the unforgiveness goes to work on us. And then it starts to show up in the ways we've talked about already, in my language. It starts to become the reason, sometimes the invisible reason, for why I can't, whatever it is, thrive. Holding a grudge just eats up energy anyway. It takes energy away from our lives that I guess we could be using on doing other things like connecting and loving and creating and solving and helping. It takes up energy. Now, there are several ways that you and I can release the past. We may not have access to a truth commission, but many people have found similar results by writing, like in the style of journaling, to vent what is going on inside, or even writing a letter to the perpetrator. Not that they would send the letter, but it's the process of expressing. And there are so many books and books and books with all the methods for how to release the past. There are even websites with 4-step method, 10-step method. In other words, today we are resource rich for how to approach forgiveness work. And I understand if you don't want to. I get it. That's the next important point. Whatever you do, try to remember not to be mean-spirited about your own forgiveness work or to force you into doing something before its time is right. Now, the story I tell to illustrate this is one that made a tremendous impact on me, and I was reminded in the previous service not to characterize all caregivers by this one story, and I think I can trust you not to do that. It is the story of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, when she was very sick, she became dependent and had nurses, aides coming to take care of her, and she noticed in her illness that they seemed to be taking out a lot of trash. A tremendous amount of trash. And when finally she was able to move around again, she discovered that it wasn't trash. They were taking her stuff daily. They were taking her paintings, keepsakes, even her diplomas. And she experienced that as a brutal betrayal. And there is this beautiful acknowledgement of her vulnerability in the book in which she says, I should forgive, but I don't want to. Not yet. I'm not even working on it. Obviously, I'm not ready. Well, that helped me more than anything I can think of. That tenderness in those first 3 words, I should. In other words, like Paul, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know, but not yet. And in the word yet is the possibility I'm looking for. Oh, yes, this is what I'm interested in. The openness to keep forgiveness on the table as a possibility. Not now, but maybe one day. The not yet. Oh, it's the vulnerability of, I know how important this is, and not yet. So far today we've talked about the importance of forgiveness work, some of the blocks that prevent us from doing it. And what I wish to leave you with today is this idea that if it is not the right time for you to do forgiveness work, fine. It's not the right time. And maybe what you can take from these stories is the encouragement to look for that willingness inside of you, so that maybe from deep within a voice can emerge saying, I'm willing to be willing to forgive, maybe. I invite you to breathe in with me. Exhaling, letting your eyes close. We turn our attention inward to acknowledge the one source of our joy, of our life, the living Spirit Almighty, that which is everywhere present, is the foundation, and it is the all in all. I identify myself with it, and its self-givingness exists in me as my ability to open up and to receive the love of the universe. And so through this spiritual mind treatment, I'm declaring what I believe is true, that it is safe to be loved, that it is safe to forgive at the right appointed time, and the Spirit of wisdom within me knows when that is. And so I celebrate that for me and for all people, and I release this word into the law of mind, and together we say, and so it is. And once again, a deep breath in, followed by a sigh.